Hello BookTube, this is part 40 of my 2022 library tour, Science Fiction and Fantasy 17. Today marks the beginning of the end of my 2022 library tour. There are only 5 videos left, this one included. So Friday is the last day I'll be doing my library tour. I will be finishing it up. And I'm more than a little happy to see the end in sight. This library tour has proven to be incredibly exhausting, particularly the science fiction and fantasy, which I'll get to later. But anyway, BookTube, let's get on with the books. Starting where I ended on Friday, I have a novel by Andre Norton, Starborn, which I picked up, I think, from the Friends of the Library book sale nook at the West Waco Library and Genealogy Center in Waco years ago for 25 cents, which for 25 cents, I'm rather willing to take a few chances, particularly on vintage science fiction and fantasy. But I haven't gotten around to it yet. Next is a book I read for the first Space Opera September, and I didn't like much, and that is Velocity Weapon by Megan E. O'Keefe. This is a space opera set in a setting where 2 planets are at war. The main protagonist is a space soldier for one of the planets. The ship she's on is a ship from the other planet, and they try to work together to cohabit as the rest of what's going on outside the ship, neither one of them knows, if I remember correctly. Also, there's I think a storyline about the main character before she joined the war, or something, but I really did not get on with this book at all. So, yeah. Next is a book that I did actually rather like, and that is David Mogo, God Hunter by Suyi Davies Okongboa. This is a post-apocalyptic urban fantasy set in Lagos, Nigeria, after an event called, I think, The Falling. In which the gods of Yoruba mythology and various other African mythologies fell on Lagos and have since tried to make a living. David Mogo is a demigod. He's the son of... I'm blanking on her name. Let me see if I can remember. Ogun. I think his mother's name is Ogun. And an unnamed human father, or unknown father in general. He has the ability to... he has a number of abilities that he uses to track down beings called godlings. That aren't exactly godlings, they're artificial, kind of sort of god-type beings. And so he goes on a number of adventures. The novel is split into roughly sort of 3 mini-novels that form a sort of, eventually come together. I rather liked it, despite my issues with David Mogo's character. He's rather a jerk, and unlikable most of the time, but on the whole, I really loved the other characters. I loved the world building, just quite liked it. I haven't gotten around to the other book by Suyi Davies Okongboa that I have, Son of the Storm. This is the first book in a new epic fantasy series. It's about a scholar who doesn't believe in magic, who is confronted by a magical warrior. Next is Half Resurrection Blues by Daniel Jose Older. This is an urban fantasy, I think set in New York, about I think the character's a psychopath whose magic may or may not have something to do with music or musical titles or just a gimmick of the story. I don't know. I dipped into this novel a few years ago, I think, and I didn't quite get on with it, but I really should get around to it eventually. Next is Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. This is one of those Tor.com novellas, or short novels. It's about a young woman whose baby brother was born during the LA riots in 1991 or 1992, after the verdict in the Rodney King trial. Rodney King was a motorist who was pulled over by the LAPD and assaulted by the LAPD. Those officers were caught on camera and they were charged and were acquitted, resulting in several days worth of rioting in the city. So the protagonist's brother is born during these riots, and the main character develops a number of superpowers, which eventually kind of weird out her family to the extent that they know she has these powers, until she abandons the family to go do whatever she does. Meanwhile, the brother, I want to say he kind of finds himself in a bad crowd that eventually sees him sentenced to prison for a number of years in New York. The family moved eventually from Los Angeles to New York. And then after he's released from prison, he goes to a weird kind of planned community in which I think the residents are former prisoners on a sort of work release parole kind of thing. I did not like this novella at all. I thought the world building just didn't work. I didn't like it at all. Next is an anthology, Heroic Fantasy, edited by Harold Page. This includes a number of short stories that I'd never heard of before, I think. It's got A Sand Sister by Andre Norton, The Valley of the Sorrows by Galad Elflinson, Ghoul's Head by Don Walsh, Astral Stray by Adrian Cole, Blood in the Mist by E.C. Tubb, The Murderous Dove by Kenneth Lee, Death in Jukun by Charles R. Saunders, The D. Petricky Ring by H. Warner Munn, The Hero Who Returned by Gerald W. Page, The Riddle of the Horn by Darrell Schweitzer, The Age of the Warrior by Hank Reinhardt, The Mistaken Oracle by A.E. Silas, Demon Song by F. Paul Wilson, and The Seeker in the Fortress by Manly Wade Wellman. So, some known names in 70s and early 80s sword and sorcery, but most of those names I don't know who they are. So, I did try to dip in, I think, to the first story, and it didn't quite appeal to me. Next is The Throne of Amancore by Joshua Palmatier. This is a bind-up edition including The Skewed Throne, The Cracked Throne, and The Vacant Throne. I won this in a giveaway. Thomas of SFF 180 a few years ago received 2 copies of this book from the publisher, and so the double he put up as a giveaway, and I won that giveaway. So next is I don't know if you could call this a classic of 21st century children's fantasy, but yeah, you could also call it a classical 21st century children's fantasy. This is Arigal Aragon by Christopher Paolini. I picked this up from the Friends of the Library book sale nook for 25 cents, and I picked it up when in a period, well, most of the books I picked up from the Friends of the Library book sale that are science fiction fantasy, I picked them up partially because I had a desire at the time to collect as much science fiction and fantasy as I could, whether I would like it or not, because of 25 cents, and also a desire to focus my library on science fiction and fantasy. So I picked this up. I haven't gotten around to it yet. I don't know if I ever will, and it's unfortunately the movie tie-in cover, which I don't like. Next is a comedic fantasy. This is 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker. It's about, it's a humorous take, I think, on a siege, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. This is the first book in a trilogy, I think, so far. The next three books are, once again, pickups from the Friends of the Library book sale nook. They're the Gorman Trilogy. This is Volume 1, Titus Grown, which came from the Meridian Public Library, which is a small city in this area. I also have Volume 2, Gorman, all by Meridian people, of course, and also from the Meridian Public Library. And finally, Titus Alone, again, the Meridian Public Library. I'm assuming nobody had actually checked these books out for a number of years, or they got new editions. So, next is Black Leviathan by Bernd Perples, translated from the German by Lucy Van Cleef. This is a German fantasy novel that came out about 2 or 3 years ago. It's basically Moby Dick with dragons. There's a crew of dragon hunters who pilot flying ships, and they basically hunt dragons like they used to hunt whales. It's a really bad book. I had to go at it a year or two ago, maybe more, and I didn't like it at all. And another book I really don't like, probably the worst book I've ever read that I've finished, Dryland's End by Felice Picano. This is a space opera in which humanity and 2 other or 3 other alien races come together as a sort of a federation called the Matriarchy. In this setting, there was apparently some kind of gender war or revolution or something, and women basically dominate society, and men are basically second-class citizens or ornamental. It's really bad. Basically, there's a AI rebellion, and the AI have launched a plague that render women infertile. So the main character and others are sent to this planet to find a rogue scientist to see if his research can help solve the problem. It's just bad. I mean, part of it is that I think Felice Picano is primarily a writer of general fiction or literary fiction. His work's mostly realistic. So maybe he was slumming and just was lazy, or his inspiration is kind of really that bad schlocky science fiction that, yeah, I don't know, but this is just bad. Just bad. If it weren't for the fact that I don't want to inflict dry sin on anybody else, I would have gotten rid of it a long time ago. Also, the fact that I did a very poor job of fixing a problem it had. The next three books are all part of a trilogy by Ricardo Pinto. The Stone Dance of the Chameleon. The first book is The Chosen. This is a fantasy that has no magic. And it's a very brutal, grimdark sort of setting. I read this years ago, and honestly I didn't get on with it, but it's one of those fantasies that in a way I kind of want to like, even if I don't really like it and really don't know why I'm keeping it. But and we also have the sequel, The Standing Dead, which came from the Waco County Library. I picked this up from, I want to say, one of the Friends of the Library book sales. I think maybe the summer one, the one that's only fiction, but it could also have been the big one in the fall. But anyway, this is the sequel, and the third book is The Third God, which I got from, so this one I ordered from a Libris, I think, because it says it came from Powell's, but I don't know if it's the Chicago one or like Powell City of Books, when they actually put some of their stuff on a Libris. So the last three books on this shelf is Witchmark by C.L. Polk. This is a gaslight fantasy set in the aftermath of World War I, in which I'm thinking a number of Britons have magical powers, and our main character, I think, acts as a nurse in a hospital where he falls in love with one of his patients, and complications ensue. And I've been meaning to get to this for a while. Next is Bone Shaker by Carrie Priest. This one I picked up from Golden's a few years ago. It's an alternate history, steampunk fantasy set in, I want to say, either pre-Civil War or post-Civil War America, in which there are zombies produced by a gas. I dipped into this a few years ago, shortly after I bought it, and I didn't particularly care for it, and I still have it. I've been meaning to get back to it, but I haven't. And finally, the last book on the shelf is His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. This is a omnibus edition of His Dark Materials. It includes the Golden Compass, the Subtle Knife, and the Amber Spyglass. I picked this up from Golden's Book Exchange years ago, again with the intention of really reading a lot of the canonical works of science fiction and fantasy, including children's fantasy, which His Dark Materials is. Also, by tomorrow we'll be seeing the first two Harry Potter books, but I haven't gotten around to this. I don't know if I ever will. And yeah. So that concludes part 40 of my 2022 library tour. There are now only 4 videos left. I will be finishing this up on Friday. I'm quite looking forward to that. Now, if you're wondering why there are no books on this bookcase behind me, that's because I got a new bookcase in last Thursday, and I forgot to mention it on Weekly Reads, largely because I was still recovering from putting it together. which was unpleasant. But anyway, I did get it put together and put it where it is. It's in the hall. And I've been kind of putting books on it to see how I like the books being moved into the hall and how much space I would have if my original goal of putting the classics, the literature of Greece and Rome, the canonical works, the major works of English and American literature and international literature, and modern and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama, plus literary criticism, would go fit on that bookcase, and it's got a shelf left. So, yeah, that kind of puts me in maybe a bit of a bind coming up, but of course, I think this library tour is showing me that I probably can use with a good pruning of my collection. But anyway, so the bookcase behind me, I'm going to move the general nonfiction and the general genre fiction onto this bookcase as a placeholder, while my history collection, which are these two bookcases here, sort of pretty much finishes up this bookcase, and then I'll move history to this bookcase. But I'll talk a bit more about this when I do a bit of my reflections on my 2022 library tour on Monday evening. So until then, BookTube. Oh, just in case you want to see my new bookcase. There it is. So anyway, BookTube, until tomorrow, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.